I think we all know Unrivaled sees it as a potential opportunity, which is still amazing that we have two co-founders as part of the Players Association as vice presidents. That's neither here nor there. We all know that's a conflict of interest. Now we have the sports media coming right out and saying it.
9 times. That's not a typo. Project B is offering WNBA players 9 times their current salary to play overseas basketball. And the threat this poses isn't theoretical anymore. Former WNBA MVP Angel McCoughtry just went on record saying players are going to start asking themselves why they're even bothering with the W. When a 6-time All-Star can make somewhere between $5 to $8 million for one season overseas versus her WNBA salary, the math stops being math and starts being existential.
Yesterday I did a video, former MVP Angel McCoughtry, she come right out and said, you're going to have women that are like, why even play in the WNBA? If I can make that much more money, what are we doing? Why are we even putting because in a player like her situation where she was like a 6-time All-Star, she's probably getting $5, $6, $7, $8 million to play over there for one season. So like, why risk it?
Here's what makes this dangerous. Project B isn't launching during some random window. They're targeting the exact same time frame as Unrivaled, end of the WNBA season, through training camp. That's Unrivaled's entire business model. And now we've got Annie Costabile from Front Office Sports, confirming what everyone's been whispering about. The exclusivity question nobody wants to answer, because Unrivaled requires their players to be exclusive during that 10-week window. But what happens when Project B shows up offering triple the money with potentially different exclusivity terms? Alyssa Thomas just gave us the answer. She's an Unrivaled player who just committed to Project B, which tells us she's not locked into a multi-year deal with Unrivaled.
This is definitely going to disrupt the women's basketball ecosystem. It's just a matter of how much.
Okay. It is a threat. You heard it right there. It's going to be really interesting. This is going to turn out to be one of the more interesting stories.
Let's talk about what's not being said here. Angel Reese played in Unrivaled's first season. She's not coming back. Sabrina Ionescu was a co-founder's teammate and one of the league's biggest stars. She's not coming back. Add Caitlin Clark, who never went in the first place. Asia Wilson, who declined. Paige Buckers, who's staying in college an extra year. That's the 5 most popular players in women's basketball, and exactly 0 of them are playing in Unrivaled's second season. You think Project B didn't notice that pattern?
Women's Professional Basketball League set to launch in November of 2026. Project B players will receive an undisclosed salary plus an equity stake in the league. Project B league officials have stated that 66 people will earn higher salaries than those currently offered in the WNBA. With a potential WNBA lockout, you have a great column out there on the ambitious plan of Project B. What's it mean for the W, though, Jay?
It means a threat. It means a real serious threat because the WNBA has spent so many years, so many decades now as kind of the only game in town in terms of professional basketball in the United States that they were vulnerable. They were vulnerable to what the tech industry would call disruption. And you're seeing that.
Yahoo senior basketball analyst Dan Devine just laid out the vulnerability the WNBA has been ignoring for decades. They've been the only game in town for so long that they stopped thinking about competition. The tech industry calls this disruption. First, Unrivaled came in offering higher salaries and equity stakes. Now Project B is doing the same thing but with a global audience and apparently even more money. The WNBA's monopoly on professional women's basketball in the United States is ending in real time.
League to compete against the NBA, probably also impossible. But if I want to create a new league for women to play basketball in and take down the W, I could make the argument that all I have to do is offer a wild amount of money to, 10 players and then get everybody else to come in. What prevents somebody from just coming in and saying, fine, I'll give Caitlin Clark $250 million up front and I'll build a whole league around her with these 10 stars and nobody's going to need the W.
Man, I'm in with you. If we could find somebody to give us $250 million, we should do that ourselves and start a third round.
Think about what was just said. You can't start a league to compete with the NFL. Impossible. Too much talent required, too much infrastructure, too much money. Same with the NBA. But women's basketball, all you need is enough money to convince 10-star players, and suddenly you've got a viable league. The talent pool is concentrated enough that you can actually pull this off, and Project B apparently has the funding to make it happen. The 11th person on their bench is reportedly making $2 million. The 11th person on the bench.
Other venues. The NBA doesn't let you do that. The PGA Tour doesn't let you do that. But the WNBA does. And as we've seen, many players will go overseas to make money outside of the regular WNBA season. Now,
okay, I'm going to stop it right there. But that's going to be a very interesting piece of the CBA.
Now, here's where the CBA negotiation gets messy. The NBA doesn't let players compete in other leagues during the season. The PGA Tour fought a war over this with LIV Golf. But the WNBA has always allowed overseas play because the salaries were so low that players needed that income to survive. That was fine when it was just European leagues during the WNBA offseason. But what happens when the WNBA tries to add language to the new CBA saying players can't play in Unrivaled or Project B? What happens when players know these leagues are offering life-changing money and the WNBA says you have to choose?
The WNBA, they want to make it where players are not playing for Unrivaled. I don't blame them. However, if you're a WNBA player in the league, in this CBA, wants to put it in there that you can't play for another league.
Reports started surfacing around the All-Star break that the WNBA wants Unrivaled gone. They want language in the CBA preventing players from competing in domestic rival leagues. Gabby Williams was one of the players who mentioned this. And you can understand the WNBA's position. They're trying to build a league, and having their stars play elsewhere during the offseason dilutes their brand. But here's the problem. The players know Project B is coming. They know what the money looks like, and if the WNBA tries to force them to choose, there's a very real possibility the players say no, which means no CBA agreement, which means a lockout.
Going to pay a lot of money. We're not agreeing to the idea that we can't play in another league. And what is that going to do to the CBA? Does that prevent them from coming to an agreement and leading to a lockout of some kind?
So let's map out what happens next. Project B launches in November 2026. That's 20 months from now. The current WNBA CBA expires after the 2027 season, which means negotiations are happening right now. Behind closed doors, with Project B's money sitting on the table as leverage for every single player. The WNBA is walking into these negotiations trying to restrict player movement while a league offering 9 times the salary is actively recruiting their talent. The Players Association has 2 of Unrivaled's co-founders serving as vice presidents, which is its own conflict of interest that the media is finally starting to acknowledge. And now you've got a potential 4-way standoff between the WNBA, Unrivaled, Project B, and the players themselves. Here's what makes this particularly complicated. Unrivaled already locked some players into multi-year deals. We know Alyssa Thomas isn't one of them because she just committed to Project B. But players like Brianna Stewart, Nafisa Collier, who are co-founders, they're presumably locked in. So Project B can't get everyone. But they don't need everyone. They just need enough star power to make their league credible. And based on the reported salaries, they can afford to make offers that are impossible to refuse. The timing of Angel Reese's decision not to return to Unrivaled is fascinating. She played in the first season. She saw how it worked. She knows the money, the format, the exposure, and she chose not to come back. Now maybe that's about rest and recovery. Maybe it's about focusing on her WNBA season. Or maybe she's keeping her options open for Project B. Same logic applies to Sabrina Ionescu. You don't walk away from Unrivaled, where you're one of the marquee names, unless you've got something better lined up or you're preserving flexibility. Project B is also positioning itself as a global league, not just a domestic one. That's significant because it changes the value proposition. Unrivaled is Miami-based, single location, 10 weeks. Project B is talking about international exposure, global audiences, building a brand that transcends American basketball. For players who already spend their off seasons playing overseas anyway, this is just a formalization of what they're already doing, except with exponentially more money and equity stakes. The WNBA's fundamental problem is that they waited too long to pay their players fairly. The league just had a record-breaking season. Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese drove unprecedented ratings and attendance, and the players are watching the revenue grow, while their salaries stay relatively stagnant. Yes, the new CBA will increase salary, but it's not going to be 9 times current levels. It's not going to be $2 million for bench players. So when Project B comes in offering that kind of money, the WNBA can't compete on pure economics. What the WNBA does have is history, infrastructure, and American media exposure. Playing in the W means playing in front of American audiences during prime time, building your brand for endorsements, getting national TV coverage. That has value. But it only has value if the salary gap isn't so enormous that players can't afford to care about those benefits. And right now, based on what we're hearing about Project B's offers, that gap might be too big to overcome. The lockout scenario is real. If the WNBA insists on exclusivity language in the new CBA, and the players refuse because they want the option to play in Project B, you've got an impact. Neither side can afford to blink. The WNBA can't allow their stars to play in a rival league during what should be their off-season training and preparation period. The players can't afford to leave that much money on the table. Something has to give. Unrivaled is caught in the middle of all this. They invested heavily in building a league, securing sponsors, paying players well above WNBA salaries. And now Project B is coming in with even more money, targeting the same players during the same window. Unrivaled's advantage is that they're established. They've already run one season successfully. Players know what they're getting. Project B is still theoretical. But if Project B delivers on these reported salary promises, Unrivaled's going to struggle to keep their non-co-founder stars. The other factor nobody's talking about is sustainability. Can Project B actually afford to pay these salaries long-term? Are they venture capital funded with a 3-year runway, planning to burn money to establish market position and then pull back? Or do they have legitimate long-term financial back? Because if it's the former, players might make a fortune for a few years and then watch the league fold, which is still a win for the players, honestly. Bank $8 million a year for 3 years. That's $24 million. That's generational wealth for most WNBA players. The WNBA's nightmare scenario is that Project B succeeds even partially. Because even if Project B only lasts 3 years, it resets salary expectations across the entire ecosystem. Once players know they can make $2 million, $5 million, $8 million playing basketball, they're never going to accept WNBA salaries that max out in the low 6 figures. The market gets permanently disrupted. And the WNBA either has to match those salaries, or accept that they're a developmental league for players who then leave for bigger money elsewhere. So where does this end? Honestly, nobody knows. We're watching a market correction happen in real time. The WNBA underpaid players for decades, because they could. Now competition is forcing them to confront that reality. Project B might succeed, might fail, might exist for a few years, and then disappear. But the impact is already happening. Players know their value, they know what the market will bear. And they're not going back to accepting less just because the WNBA says that's what the league can afford. The power dynamic has shifted, and it's not shifting